Today we're going to wrap up our True Roots class. I told you last week we were talking about tithing, theologically, the doctrine, and today we're going to be talking about the Sabbath. Okay? So hopefully you got some notes, and you can kind of jump in with us, and we'll be going through today's lesson. So we're going to start in Genesis chapter 2, which is the first reference to the Sabbath. Now, I want to remind you, last week we talked about the difference between the laws that we no longer follow and commands that we still follow today, certain principles we live by. And I gave you the insight that one of the things that helps us to understand it is, do we find something throughout the whole Bible? And so what we'll talk about in a minute is that keeping the Sabbath holy is actually one of the 10 commandments, but that's not where we first see it listed. We actually find it much before the law. You're probably familiar with this. We find this going back to the beginning of creation, the beginning of time. The first reference to Sabbath is in Genesis chapter 2, verses 1 through 3. It says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the host of them. And on the seventh day God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day." This is the Hebrew word. He took a Sabbath. It means to rest from all the work that he had done. And God blessed the seventh day, and he made it what? Holy, which means set apart, because on it God rested from all the work that he had done in creation. Now we'll talk really in depth about this idea, but there's a few things I want you to understand. First off, the principle of the Sabbath, like we talked about, tithing is not necessarily about 10%, it's about giving God your first and best. The principle of the Sabbath is not about having a day of the week where you do nothing, although we'll talk about what that looks like, but it is the principle of resting and how important that is. Now, everything we're going to talk about today is very un-American. Okay? And so I'm going to challenge you with some ideas, and we're going to see how strong the Bible is about this idea, and it's going to mess you up a little bit, but this is a very important thing, and I want you to get this, just how important it is. Now, I just loaned someone, or gave someone, let me say that, I gave someone that I work with who was sick some sick days, because in our church staff, you can give other people your sick time off. And I was able to give somebody some sick time, and to them it was real significant, but to me it really wasn't, because to start this year, I had 109 sick days in the bank. And I'm going to have more at the end of this year. And a large part of the reason why I have so many sick days is, one, I've worked at the Celebration Church for 15 years now, but two, because like the first 5 years I worked here, I never took vacation. And all your vacation time that's unused rolls over as sick time. So I had sick days I weren't taking, personal days I wasn't taking, and vacation days I weren't taking. And to me, as a young man, that was some kind of a badge of honor, that I didn't take any time off. Matter of fact, I thought it defined how successful I was until I began really studying what the Bible had to say, and I realized it was just a badge of sinfulness. Because it is the sin of self-reliance, which is a very American sin. There was a king in the Old Testament, his name was Saul, and he was the predecessor to David. He was rejected by God because the spirit of Saul was the spirit of, thanks God, I appreciate the hookup, I got it from here. Because Saul in his life would very much seek God for guidance and direction. God would tell him exactly what to do. Saul would start doing it that way, and then he'd say, thanks God, I appreciate the hookup, I got it from here, and would inevitably screw everything up. And that's very American. We look to God and we say, God, I can do this on my own strength and ability. I don't need you. And if I need you, it's a sign of weakness in my life. We're not obligated to live in legalism, but we are required to live by certain principles, and I want you to live by the principle of rest. And we're going to talk about this. Now, I want you to notice that the terminology when they talk about the Sabbath throughout the Bible is that a person who observes the Sabbath realizes that it's holy and is blessed for doing it. So blessing and holiness are linked over and over again to this concept of Sabbath. Now, the Sabbath is also linked to provision. If we go to Exodus chapter 16, verses 1 through 5, sets the stage for verses 23 to 30. Now, verses 1 through 5 in Exodus 16 is where the people of Israel are given manna from heaven. And for those of you who are not familiar with this, when God led the people of Israel out of slavery in Egypt, they crossed over the Red Sea, they ended up in the wilderness, and they had nothing to eat. And so God would provide supernaturally and miraculously by giving them a day's worth of bread from heaven called manna every single day. But the way God set it up is he said, on the sixth day, I'm going to give you a double portion of bread. And so on the seventh day, you're not supposed to go collect any bread. And I don't want you to try to save it up. Okay? So this is where it talks about that. Exodus 16, 1 through 5, it says, they set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the people of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai. On the 15th day of the second month, after they had departed from the land of Egypt, the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. So what were they doing? Complaining, right? And here was their complaint. The people of Israel said to them, would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full, for you have brought us out into this wilderness to kill this whole assembly with hunger. So they're complaining, hey, we ain't got nothing to eat, and we hungry. We were better off when we were enslaved in Egypt, and we had nice full pots of meat, and could have whatever we wanted. Now, you need to know this is the second time the people of Israel have complained since God has let them go. The first time is when they were at the Red Sea, and they looked at Moses and said, we would have been better off as slaves in Egypt than to die out here in the wilderness. And that's the great lie of the wilderness of sin, is that you're better off in slavery than you are free. So here they say, well, you've left us out here. We don't have anything to eat. Verse 4, then the Lord said to Moses, behold, I'm about to rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I might test them, whether they will walk in my law or not. On the sixth day, when they prepare what they bring in, it will be twice as much as they gather daily. Now, the reason for this is because God was saying, I want you to rely on me every single day. On the sixth day, I'm going to provide double, so that on the seventh day, you don't go to collect anything. You just rest. But what I don't want you to do is I don't want you to think that you can store this up. The only day you're supposed to save leftovers is on the sixth day. And the people didn't listen to God, because the people of Israel was stupid, just like Christians today. And we rely on our own strength and ability. And they said, well, we're going to just save up a little extra just in case God was lying. Just in case God forgets to provide for us today, we're going to save a little bit extra. Well, when they would try to save up extra, they would wake up the next morning and they would go to get it, and they would realize that overnight it had rotted and filled with worms. And so it was unedible, right? Because I'm not the smartest man in the world, but when something's rotten and there's maggots in it, you don't eat it, right? That's not hard to figure out. Now, that's what was happening. So we jump down to verse 23. Moses said to them, this is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow, which was the seventh day, is to be a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you'll bake and boil what you'll boil, and all that is left over lay aside to be kept till the morning. So they laid it aside till the morning, as Moses commanded them, and it did not stink, and there were no worms in it. That's what the reference is, right? Moses said, eat it today, for today is the Sabbath to the Lord. Today you'll not find it in the field. 6 days you shall gather it, but on the seventh day, which is a Sabbath, there'll be none. So on the sixth day you'll have extra. Bake what you want to bake, boil what you want to boil, whatever you have left over, God's going to preserve to the seventh day. Don't go out and try to gather it, because you're supposed to be doing what? Resting. So the seventh day comes, verse 27. On the seventh day, some of the people went out to do what? But they found what? Nothing. And the Lord said to Moses, how long will you and these stubborn, stiff-necked people refuse to keep my commandments and my laws? See, the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, on the sixth day, he gives you bread for 2 days. Remain each of you in his place. Let no one go out of his place on the seventh day. So the people then finally rested on the seventh day. Now, here's what God is saying. The Sabbath is about you trusting me to provide for your needs, and believing that if you rest, I'll still take care of you. You can rest because I got you. But unfortunately, most people can't do this. Now, the Sabbath is one of the 10 commandments. It made God's top 10 list. Most important things that you need to watch out for. Now, we know when we talk about these commandments, we don't believe as New Testament Christians that obeying God will save us. It will not save us. But there are blessings that come from God when we do choose to obey him. That's why this is important, is because the blessing in your life is linked to your ability to obey what God is leading you to do. The word commandment is literally the word prescription. And if you think about the word prescription, it is something a doctor would give you, and it literally means to write down script beforehand. Prescribe. Here, I'm going to give this to you before there's something wrong with you, so if you go take it, it won't get worse. So you take it believing that it's what's going to bless you or help you or minister to you, and that's what a command is. So here's the 10 commandments, Exodus 23 through 17. We read them last week. We'll do them again. You shall have no other gods before me, number 1. Number 2, you shall not make for yourself a carved image or an idol. You can keep on reading that if you'd like. Number 3, don't take the name of the Lord your God in vain. Number 4, remember the Sabbath day, keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work. You or your son or your daughter, your male or female servant, your livestock, the sojourner who's with you, staying within your gates. For in the 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth and the sea and all that's in them, and then he rested on the 7th day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath and made it holy. Then he says, number 5, honor your father and mother. 6, you shall not murder. 7, don't commit adultery. 8, don't steal. 9, don't lie. Number 10, you shall not covet. Now, let's break these down and talk about these. Do you think that it's okay for you to violate the 10 commandments today? No. Okay, so let's talk about it. Do you think that it's okay to put another God before the one true God? No. Do you think that it's okay for you to have idols in your house? No. Little statues of people you worship and pray to? Do you think that it's okay to take the Lord's name in vain? No. Let's skip number 4. Do you think you need to honor your father and mother? Yes. Do you think it's okay to murder? No. Think it's okay to commit adultery? No. Is it okay to lie? No. Is it okay to steal? No. Is it okay to covet? No. So why do most people think it's okay to violate the Sabbath? Most people don't really think about, hey, I need to have set aside time to rest in my life. Now, I understand this. I have a very busy life. I have 4 kids. They're at various different age ranges. They all have stuff going on. It's almost as though neither of the week goes by, there's not activities that need to happen. I had 4 different places to be between 3 and 6:30 tonight. Literally, Sam and Lorena and Victoria, they knew their instructions were just keep playing until I show up. I just walked right in, 6:50. Okay, ready to teach. I got a lot going on. It would be very easy for me to violate the Sabbath and make good excuses for it. I mean, what kind of work am I doing? I'm doing the Lord's work, right? I mean, if I'm working for God, that should be okay, right? Well, let me ask you, would it be okay if I murdered somebody as a part of the Lord's work? Is it okay if I take the offering and go hit the treasure chest and put it all on black? What if I win? Still wrong. Still wrong, right? No, of course not. I couldn't violate any other ones. Why would it be okay for me to violate this one? The Sabbath's a testimony. As we rest one day a week, we're showing our dependence on God. It displays our belief in our Creator and our trust that He will provide for us. When we work 6 days and rest on the Sabbath, we're trusting God to provide extra for the day we don't work. Let's look at what God has to say about this. Exodus 31:12-17. The Lord said to Moses, you are to speak to the people of Israel and say, above all, you shall keep my Sabbaths. For this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I, the Lord, sanctify you. You shall keep the Sabbath because it's holy for you. Everyone who profanes it shall be put to death. There's only 3 sins in the Old Testament that you would receive the death penalty for. 1 is committing adultery, 2 is dishonoring your father and mother, and 3 is not keeping the Sabbath. Everyone who profanes it shall be put to death. Whoever does any work on it, that soul shall be cut off from among his people. 6 days shall work be done, but the 7th is a Sabbath of solemn rest, holy to the Lord. Whoever does any work on the Sabbath shall be put to death. Second time it says it. Therefore the people of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, observing the Sabbath throughout their generations as a covenant forever. It is a sign forever between me and the people of Israel, that in the 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, and on the 7th day he rested and was refreshed. Now, there's a few challenging things that's taking place in this passage. One of them is the understanding that the Sabbath is to be a sign of God's relationship with us. We were grafted into Israel as Gentiles, and that's part of our covenant and our relationship with God, and it serves as a testimony, a witness. Now, let me get real nitty-gritty for you. Most companies today expect their employees to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Yes, they do. Yes, they do. You should be available if we call you. I know several people that tell me they're required on their job to be on their email till 10, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock at night every night. Have conference calls, people call, ideas they want to discuss, things that need to happen, and people expect you to work all the time. Now, what if you say, hey, I'm not going to work on that day? So this is nitty-gritty, right? Now, let's talk about some practical applications. Anybody ever tried to go to Chick-fil-A on Sunday? I pulled up and got mad. Like, dang, why y'all closed on Sunday? Now, you think about how much money they're giving up being closed on Sunday. Even if they didn't. Even if you didn't respect them. If that's what God has called us to do. Shouldn't you be willing to do it? Now, I'm going to say this. Do you think Chick-fil-A has been blessed for being closed on Sunday? I do. I do. It's chicken nuggets, y'all. That's all it is, chicken nuggets. Now, here's the deal. Part of this principle is saying, okay, do I believe that putting up this boundary and living by this commitment and living by this principle, God's going to bless me for it? That's being real. That's being real. Now, we'll talk about legalism and what this practically looks like in just a minute. But I want you to see the importance of this. Now, I want you to take note. It says at the end of this passage we just read that on the 7th day when God rested, he was rested and refreshed. Now, let me explain to you. This is kind of challenging theologically. If God is omnipotent, meaning all-powerful, why would he need to be refreshed? I mean, let me ask you this. Has God ever fallen asleep on the job? No, he has not, right? So why would God need to be refreshed? Well, when you study this Hebrew word that's written, you know the Old Testament is translated from Hebrew into English. The word literally means that God breathed in on the 7th day. Now you think about this. What was God doing for 6 days? Speaking. And how was he speaking? He was breathing it out, right? You can't speak without breathing out, right? I mean, literally, wind is going through your vocal cords, and that's what's making the sound. You got to breathe out to speak. You can't do it any other way. He was breathing out for 6 days. What was the last thing God created? Man on the 6th day. And how did he create man? Remember, I said he formed up the dust, and then what did he do? He breathed out life into man. So for 6 days, God was breathing out. And on the 7th day, he breathed in. Now, this has 2 implications. One, you know what this means. Somebody ever hit you with something, man? Give me a minute to catch my breath. Give me a minute. Let me get my bearings straight. Resting is important for you to get your bearings straight. There's a word for people that don't rest. Crazy. It makes you crazy. Literally. The other thing this implies, when it says God breathed in, is you ever thought, man, I'm just breathing in nature. I'm just breathing in God's creation. I'm just taking a moment to enjoy my life. Now, we are in the process as a Kenner congregation of acquiring a building. And I've had numerous people say, are you excited? And the answer is no, I'm not excited. Why? Because all I see is how much work I need to do. All I see is to breathe it out. Now, what's going to take is a moment for me to stop and breathe in and go, let's see what God's doing. Let's thank God for what he's doing. But if you're so busy, you never rest, you never breathe in, you never really get to see what God's doing in your life and just sit and enjoy it. You know, I've had these moments where it's like, all right, I sit and I say, all right, Lord, thank you for where I'm at. I live in a 3-bedroom house with a 2-car garage. I live in a house I thought rich people lived in when I was growing up. I live in a neighborhood where I know rich people lived when I was growing up. Now, I don't feel rich now. But I'm doing pretty good. I'm married. Been married for a while. Worked at the same job. I was just telling you, I worked at the same job 15 years. That's pretty impressive. Most people by the time they're my age have had 3 careers. Hey, that's something to be grateful for. God set me up to be successful. 4 kids. They all good looking. Look like they mama. None of them look like me. Yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to get on Maury Povich, find out if I'm the father. You know, it's like that kind of bad. They don't look like me at all, Chantrell. Nothing like me. They do. They all bad. You know, but if you never have a moment to rest and to reflect and to get refreshed and to breathe all it in, you take for granted what you have. You really do. You take for granted what you have. Not only is the Sabbath a testimony, it testifies to the world you're taking your relationship with God seriously. You're not willing to violate his principles. You trust him to provide for you. It's a sign that keeps you refreshed. The Sabbath is also serious to God. The Sabbath is serious to God. Look at this passage, Numbers 15, 32 to 36. While the people of Israel were in the wilderness, they found a man gathering sticks on the Sabbath day. And those who found him gathering sticks brought him to Moses and Aaron and all the congregation, and they put him in custody. You know what that means, right? Yeah, they arrested him and they put him under guard, right? And it says, because it had not been made clear what should be done to him. Now, we just read Exodus that said if anybody works on the Sabbath, what happens? You kill him. So was it clear to them? Yes, it was. They just didn't want to go through with it, right? So they said, we're just going to lock him up and pray about what needs to happen. And the Lord said to Moses, the man shall be put to death. All the congregation shall stone him with stones outside the camp. And all the congregation brought him outside the camp, and they stoned him to death with stones. And then the Lord commanded Moses, just as the Lord had commanded Moses. Now, can we be honest here? What was the man doing? Picking up sticks. I mean, that doesn't seem like that bad, right? But the Lord says, no, this is really bad. Why? Why was this really bad? Well, here's a few things. It's not just disobedience. It's disobedience to something very specific. Let me ask you this. If you don't take a Sabbath, what's going to happen to you?
Burn out. Crazy.
You're going to burn out and get crazy, and you might actually die. Do you know that there's nothing that affects your health like stress, scientifically? Nothing. So when you say, hey, I don't need a Sabbath, I don't need rest, what are you saying to God? I don't consider my life valuable. So it's okay for you to kill it, but it's not okay for God to? God's saying, hey, if that's the way you're going to go, let's just speed up the process. This is a really serious thing to God. Why? In today's world, there's consequences when we don't rest. We become tired. Our health suffers. We die sooner from stress-related illnesses. And stress from lack of rest also harms our relationships. I'm going to tell you one of the most important things I could ever tell you. I think that there are more divorces caused in America by the violation of the Sabbath than anything else in the world. I think that people's marriages suck because they're too busy. Straight up. I think that the number one cause of divorce in the United States is the violation of rest. And I think that the number one cause for the violation of rest is people trying to live vicariously and do too much for their children. Straight up. There's nothing that destroys your marriage like a lack of rest. Because if you don't have rest, you don't have time with one another. There's never any downtime. That's called having a relationship. It's called having a conversation. Me and my wife, we talk about this all the time. There are seasons in our life where we look at each other and say, man, we're just ships passing in the night. And when that's the case, you need to make some changes. And if you say, well, I'm too busy to make changes, that means you think you're your provider again. You don't trust God to provide for you. And the reason God's not blessing you is because you're trying to do it in your own strength and ability. I just got to work more. I just got to work more. I'm going to work myself out of this hole. That's a lie from the devil. You're not going to work your way out the hole. You're going to work your way into death. You're going to kill your marriage. You're going to kill your family. You're going to kill everything you've worked hard to get. Then you're going to be divorced. Then you're going to be broke. Then you really ain't going to have no time because then you're really going to be working, and you create a never-ending cycle. God says if you're going to kill yourself and your life and your marriage, I'll just go ahead and kill you anyway. That's how serious this is to God. This is a really big deal to God. So what should you do on the Sabbath? That's what people always ask. Well, what do you do on the Sabbath? Well, you rest.
Breathe in.
Well, what's rest mean? Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that for a minute. The key is not what do you do on the Sabbath. That's not the right answer. That's not the right question. The right question is what shouldn't you do on the Sabbath? And the answer is very simple. Work. Now, what is work? That's not right. That's what most people think. Well, work's anything. That's why if you're Jewish and you're going to buy a house, you buy a house very close to the synagogue because on Saturday you walk in there. Because driving a car is considered work. And we'll talk about that. That's getting legalistic. There's a principle here. Now, what is work for you? What is work for you? I don't know. You know what your job is, whatever your job is. Whatever your job is, that's what work is. So let me explain it for me, okay? So me and Dana talk about this. She says to me all the time, on Friday, which is my day off, I take that day off. On Friday, she'll tell me, you're not allowed to check your email. Why? But let me explain to you what happens. If I check my email, I'm going to find out something that either A, I need to do, B, something that went wrong, or C, someone who's offended. Which of the three is the worst? Yeah, absolutely. Because guess what I'm doing? Thinking about it. Worrying about it. How am I going to respond to that person? How am I going to deal with that person? Well, let me just break this down to you. Okay, I don't know if y'all figured this out about me yet or not, but I usually offend at least one person a week. Victoria, who sings up here after Sunday, she said, man, she said, you're killing me. I said, what? She said, you talked about people that had a music degree. That's what I got. My bad. And we were just joking about it. But here's the reality. I offend people all the time. Well, if I check my email, that's working, and as soon as I engage to work, my mind engaged to work, and I no longer had any time to breathe in or to rest. Now, my wife, email is not work for her. She's a stay-at-home mom. She checks her email once every 6 months. If you want to communicate with her, don't send an email. If you send an email, you better send her a text telling her I sent you an email. Because not only does she not check her email, she does not delete her email. When you open her inbox, it is 18,686 emails, and she done at every place signed up for updates, coupons, everything else. She don't even care. Your email is a needle in a haystack. That's not work for her, but it's work for me. Now, here's the temptation. The temptation is to think, but yeah, even on my day off, God needs me. But here's the truth. God don't need me. You ever thought about that? God really don't need me. He don't need you either. We're very replaceable in this equation. This is a very important subject. This idea of resting is serious to God. Don't work. So, if you got a carpentry business, that means there's a dedicated time of rest. That you say, I'm not going to be sawing. And I'm not going to be constructing, and I'm not going to be building. And I'm not going to be sending invoices. And I'm not going to be doing estimates. And I'm not going to be doing follow-up calls and drawings and whatever else. I'm not going to be working. I have a time of rest. Now, you need to schedule this. Because if you don't schedule it, you won't do it. I was listening to one pastor talk about this. He was saying how when he was a young man, he wanted to meet up with this guy for lunch. And he said, hey, man, what about next Thursday? What do you have on your calendar? And the guy said, I don't have anything on my calendar. I got nothing on there. I said, well, good. Let's schedule it. We'll have lunch. He said, no, I can't do that. I said, what do you mean you can't do that? What do you have on your calendar? He said, well, I have nothing on my calendar. He said, well, let's schedule lunch. I said, no, I can't do that. And the guy said, what do you have on your calendar? I said, I don't think you understand him. I have nothing on my calendar. I'm planning on doing nothing on that day. That's what it means to have a Sabbath. Now, can you watch football? You said that, Phil? Yeah, of course you can. Can you go to the mall? Of course you can. Can you go to whatever? Yeah, whatever. Just don't work. Because when you start working, that consumes you. That consumes you. And you need to figure that out. No, it's not. It's whatever your career is. Doing chores is taking care of the things that God gave you.
So the guy in the scripture was a stick gatherer.
No, in all likelihood, he was gathering sticks for what? Fire to build something. No, you would use fire for lots of other things besides cooking. What else would you use fire for? Yeah, maybe he was a chef. Could have been, no, but he could have been making pottery. He could have been using it to cure things. We don't know exactly what he was doing, but I'm going to assume, yeah.
But it means that whatever he was doing was work.
Well, part of the thing is we're reading a passage from the law, and we're applying it as people who live under grace. So we're pulling the principle out, and we're saying, hey, we're not going to be legalistic about this, although in the Old Testament times things were legalistic because you were trying to follow the law to the detail. Some people say anything's work. For some people, I think going to the grocery is work. You can decide that for yourself. But here's what you're planning to do. Rest and to do nothing. Some people, Walmart stresses out. I'm going to be honest with y'all. Walmart does not stress me out at all. Walmart does not stress me out. My wife hates Walmart. But guess what my wife does for a living? She's a homemaker. So guess what's part of her job? Going to Walmart. So when she goes there, let me explain this to you. When I go to the grocery store and my wife says, get these 5 things, what do I get? 4 out of 5. Okay? That's 80%. That's a C in any school. And that's passing. Now, if my wife goes to the store for 5 things, she spends at least $245. Because this is how she thinks. Well, we got enough cereal for the next 2 days, but I don't feel like coming back here in the next 2 days. So I'm going to get cereal for the future. And we might have milk, but we're going to run out of that eventually anyway, so I'm just going to buy some more of that. And you can never have enough yogurt in my house because kids go through yogurt like crazy. So I'm going to go ahead and get 18 packs of that. And I mean, we might have bread, might not, but I'm going to get 2 loaves just in case because in my house with 4 kids, we go through a loaf of bread in 2 sittings. That's 2 meals. Yeah, my mom was making fun of me because we do. We buy peanut butter about a 55-gallon drum. They put the peanut butter in my car with a forklift. They got a pallet jack to put the peanut butter in my car, all right? But here's the deal. That's how my wife thinks because to my wife it's being at work. But to me it's not. You got to figure that out for yourself. I don't know what work is to you, but whatever work is, don't do that. Plan to do nothing. Now, let's talk about the Sabbath and Lordship. Matthew 12, 1 through 8 says, at that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. This is in the New Testament now. Oh, I didn't read the passage before this, did I? Let's back up. Matthew 12, 9 through 14. He went on from there, and Jesus entered the synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. And they asked him, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? So they might accuse him. Because it wasn't lawful. You weren't allowed to heal people on the Sabbath because that was work, which is ridiculous. And Jesus says that. He said to them, which of you who has a sheep and it falls into the pit on a Sabbath will not take hold of it and lift it out? How much more value is a man than a sheep? So it's lawful to do good on the Sabbath. And he said to the man, stretch out your hand. And the man stretched it out, and it was restored healthy like the other. But the Pharisees went out and conspired against him how they would destroy him. They tried to trick Jesus. Jesus healed the man anyway and said that's ridiculous. Of course, if you have an emergency at work and it's your rest day, you need to go deal with it, right? Like they call you and say, hey, the building's on fire. You don't say, well, it's my Sabbath. So y'all going to have to take care of that. Just like me as a pastor, if you called and said, hey, my mom's in the hospital, they think she's not going to make it, will you come and pray? I'm not going to go, sorry, it's my Sabbath. You might want to call another church. That's ridiculous, right? We're not trying to be legalistic and ridiculous. We're trying to apply the principle of rest. You understand what I'm saying? Now, before that passage in Matthew 12, it says, at that time Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry, and they began to pluck heads of grain to eat. When the Pharisees saw them, they said to him, look, your disciples are doing what's not lawful on the Sabbath. But Jesus said to them, have you not read what David did when he was hungry? And those who were with him, how he entered the house of God, ate the bread of the presence, which it was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priests? Or have you not read in the law how on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are guiltless, because they work and do temple sacrifices even on the Sabbath? I tell you, something greater than the temple is here. If you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless, for the Son of Man is the what? The Lord of the Sabbath. Now here's what's important. The reason why you take a Sabbath is one, to rest, but two, to recenter that Jesus is the Lord of your life. God, you're the one that provides. You're the one that grows my business. You're the one that makes my sales happen. You're the one who gives me the effort to do the work I need to do. You're the one who takes care of everything. And because you provide for me and you're the Lord of my life, I'm going to follow what you're asking me to do, even if it mathematically doesn't make sense. Now, let me put this practically. This is Lenny over here. Everybody say, what's up, Lenny?
Hey, Lenny.
Lenny and I haven't talked about this. I'm putting him on the spot, but I know Lenny well enough to know he'll be okay with this. And if he's not, he can be offended and send me an email, which I won't check. That's it. Now, here's the deal. Lenny's a police officer. Okay? Now, Lenny's schedule might not be the same every week. I don't know if your schedule's the same or not. Does it rotate or change? It changes, okay? So in Lenny's situation, his Sabbath is going to change. Does it have to be one certain day? No. It's going to change. Now, here's what he has to watch out for. Lenny's got 2 kids. He's got a wife. He's got a family. He's got people he's providing for. This is where Lenny could get into trouble. If Lenny said, you know what? I'm going to work 5 days this week, but I'm going to pick up 2 days of doing details because my family really needs the money. And so he does that for 6 months. And the money comes in, and it just goes out. And after the end of 6 months, you got just as little money as you had when you started. But now your wife hates you because she's been raising kids by herself, and she's bitter and miserable. I know this because I have a wife at home who's raising kids by herself sometimes, and she needs assistance and help. But because you're providing, you violated the Sabbath, thinking that the money is what was providing, when the reality is God that's providing. And you say, you know what? I'm going to always make time for God and rest and taking care of my family and myself. It's a very easy thing to get into. Very easy thing for anybody to get into. But you got to live by this principle. Okay? Make sense? That fair, Lenny? Okay. I'm going to get an email tomorrow, I know. Now, let me mess you up. Let me mess you up. This is going to really mess you up. Unobserved Sabbaths accumulate. Let's look at the scripture. 2 Chronicles 36, 20-21. He took in exile in Babylon those who had escaped from the sword, and they became servants to him and to his sons until the establishment of the kingdom of Persia. So the people of Israel were captured by the Babylonians and the Persians. Verse 21, in order to fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, look at this, until the land had enjoyed its Sabbaths, all the days that it lay desolate, it kept Sabbath to fulfill 70 years. Now, this is a reference to a passage in Leviticus that states the people of Israel were to work the land for 6 years and then let it rest in the 7th year. But because the people of Israel were so self-sufficient and self-reliant, they, of course, didn't listen. They did not listen to this for 490 years, which that was a collection of 70 Sabbaths. So God, who's an accountant, that's why he holds us accountable, kept record for 490 years. All the Sabbaths they didn't keep. And he said, because you didn't take care of my land the way I asked you to, I am going to keep you in the Babylonian exile for 70 years. Until the Sabbaths have had enough time to catch up. Because they're behind 70 Sabbaths. Now, why is this important? Because here's what happens. We violate the Sabbath, and we think we get away with it. And then we do it again. And then we do it again. And then we do it again. And they just keep adding up. Until one day, we have to pay the piper. Now, sometimes that's health. Sometimes that's we lose our job or our business closes. We stop getting business that were coming in. You know how crazy it is to work 7 days a week, 10, 12 hours a day and then get laid off? Now what you were counting on to provide is no longer there. These things add up, and you got to pay the piper. Here's the last thing. The Sabbath is for our benefit. It's there for us, to help us. Here's the last thing we see. Verse 27, this is Mark 2. This is the same passage we just read in Matthew, but it says something the one in Matthew doesn't say. Verse 27, Jesus says, and he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath, so the Son of Man is Lord even over the Sabbath. Now the phrase we didn't have before was the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. Amen. What is that saying? That's saying this is for your benefit. God has set this up in order to get you to take care of yourself. Now there are 4 gas tanks everyone has. You have a mental gas tank. You have an emotional gas tank. You have a spiritual gas tank. And you have a physical gas tank. Now let me help you out. The older you get, the more quickly you use your gas. This is true. It's true. When I was 22, I could write a sermon at 10 o'clock at night. No problem. I could write a sermon at 1 in the morning. Now, I can't do that. I can't write a sermon after about 10:30 in the morning. My best thinking time is between 7 and 10:30. So I try to make sure that the things that are important for me to work on, I do then. When I was a young man, I would wait until 3 o'clock to prepare this lesson that I'd be teaching at 6:30. This lesson was done by 8:30 this morning. Because I got to use my thinking time. Physically, you burn energy faster when you get older, right? Yeah, exactly. There were some things when you were young, you thought, I'm going to do that. And then you get older and you say, yeah, I ain't going to do that. Spiritually, you burn your gas tank. Emotionally. Now, let me ask you this. How full does your gas tank need to be? Now let's think about God's terminology. God says, be filled and keep on being filled to the point where you're so filled you are what? Overflowing. God wants you to live in the overflow. But if you don't ever rest, you don't live on the overflow. There's this old commercial. It's a Head & Shoulders commercial. I don't know if you remember this. And the one guy is trying to tell the other guy that he needs to use Head & Shoulders. And remember, he'd have like the white dust, and you could see it. And the guy tells the guy who's selling him on the Head & Shoulders, well, why do you use Head & Shoulders? You don't have dandruff. And the guy says, exactly. You remember that commercial? Yeah, exactly. The people who are living in the overflow don't need to take a Sabbath because they take a Sabbath. The people who live on fumes desperately need a Sabbath, but never will. Because they think, if I rest, I'm going to run out of gas. And the most they ever do is put $2 in it. Some of you grew up at a time when that was doing something, right? Yeah, now $2 don't even get you to the next station. Shoot, some of them, you pull the trigger, it's already $3.50 before you even let it go one time. But the principle behind this is take care of yourself. Take care of the physical body, the mind, the emotions, and the spirit God gave you. You got to take care of those things. You take care of them by resting. And the people that need rest the most won't do it. Because you think you can't afford to, but the truth is you can't afford not to. It's going to kill you. So you take your calendar for this week and you plan out on which day you're going to do nothing. You schedule it. You're not going to work. And you get diligent about it. Not legalistic, but diligent. And you get it right for a month. And then it falls apart. And you got to get back on the horse and do it again. And you get it right, and it falls apart, and you got to do it all again. Amen. You got to keep working it. Work to get your rest. It's crazy. One of the 10 Commandments is to take a day off of work, and we can't even keep that one. Got what I'm saying? Capiche? All right.